The HOA demanded I join or leave until I discovered their precious boat dock was built on my land. My life changed the day Uncle Frank passed away. He was my mother's older brother, a crusty old bachelor who'd spent the last 30 years of his life in a modest cabin on Lake Serenity. Growing up, I'd spent a few summers there fishing with him, learning to tie knots and clean catches while he told stories about his time in the Navy. We'd fallen out of touch over the last decade as my career in the city consumed me, so the phone call about his passing hit me with a wave of guilt I wasn't prepared for. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. I was even less prepared for the second phone call from his attorney informing me that I was the sole beneficiary of Uncle Frank's estate. "It's not much," the lawyer said, "just the cabin and whatever's in it, but it's paid off and the property taxes are manageable. I figured I'd clean it out, put it on the market, and use the proceeds to pay down my student loans." I had no idea. I was walking into a hornet's nest of entitlement and bureaucracy. After settling Uncle Frank's modest affairs, I drove up to Lake Serenity for the first time in years. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, but the location was just as breathtaking, perched on a gentle slope with the sparkling lake just 50 yards away. A weathered dock extended into the water, though it clearly needed some repairs. I felt a pang of nostalgia so strong it nearly knocked me over. Maybe I wouldn't sell right away. Maybe I'd fix it up first, spend a few weekends here, reconnect with those simpler times. That pleasant fantasy lasted exactly 3 days. I was drinking coffee on the small porch, admiring the morning mist rising off the lake, when a golf cart came buzzing up my dirt driveway. 2 men in pressed khakis and pastel polo shirts disembarked, their faces set in identical expressions of polite disapproval. The taller one, sporting an impressive white mustache, introduced himself as Gerald Thornton, president of the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association. "We understand you're Frank Miller's nephew," Gerald said, not bothering to ask my name. "We're here to discuss some pressing matters regarding this property." I invited them to join me for coffee, but they declined, preferring to stand. Gerald's companion, who introduced himself as Howard from the Compliance Committee, pulled out a tablet and began tapping away. "Your uncle was quite a character," Gerald continued, his tone suggesting this wasn't a compliment. "He refused to join our association when it formed 15 years ago. We allowed him to remain as a non-member given his advanced age and prior residency. However, with his passing, we need to address the status of this property." I took another sip of coffee. "What exactly does that mean?" Gerald's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The terms of our founding agreement state that when a non-member property changes hands, the new owner must either join the association or vacate within 30 days. I nearly choked on my coffee. "Excuse me?" Association dues are $450 monthly, with a one-time $5,000 integration fee for previously non-compliant properties. We'll need the cabin brought up to community standards within 90 days. That includes replacing this rustic exterior with our approved siding options. Howard helpfully turned his tablet to show me a selection of beige vinyl siding samples. "Oh, and the dock will need to be removed, of course." "The dock? Why?" Gerald's expression suggested I'd asked why the sky is blue. "All lakefront structures must be community property, accessible to all homeowners. Your uncle was grandfathered in, but now that the property is changing hands, we'll be extending the community dock to this section of shoreline." I felt anger rising. This cabin was the last connection to my uncle, and these strangers were telling me I had to gut it, pay them thousands of dollars, and give up the dock where I'd spent childhood summers learning to fish. "I need to review the property documents before making any decisions," I said, trying to stay calm. Gerald nodded condescendingly. "Of course. We'll be back on Friday for your decision. Just remember, if you choose not to join, we'll expect the property vacated within 30 days, as per agreement." As they drove away in their golf cart, I called Uncle Frank's attorney. Something wasn't adding up. The attorney, Mr. Peterson, was surprisingly helpful for a man who charged $300 an hour. "I was wondering when they'd come knocking," he said when I explained the situation. "Your uncle mentioned the HOA had been trying to get their hands on his property for years." "Can they really force me to join or leave?" I asked. "Let me send you the full property records. Frank was very particular about keeping everything in order. You look through those and I'll go through the HOA founding documents." The records arrived by email within the hour. I spent the rest of the day and most of the night poring over surveys, deeds, and documents dating back to the 1950s when the area was mostly undeveloped wilderness. The property lines on the survey caught my attention. They didn't match what I'd assumed. According to these documents, Uncle Frank's land extended much further than just the cabin and its immediate surroundings. I called Mr. Peterson first thing in the morning. "Am I reading this right? The property line extends all the way to that big outcropping of rocks?" "That's correct," the attorney confirmed. "Frank purchased the entire 5-acre parcel in 1972, well before the development began. The HOA properties were carved out of the adjacent farmland in the late 90s. So that means I traced the property line on the survey again, my finger running along the shoreline. Yes." Mr. Peterson sounded amused. "The community dock they're so proud of? Approximately 60% of it is anchored on your land." A slow smile spread across my face. "And they have no jurisdiction over my property because Uncle Frank never joined?" "Precisely. Frank was quite adamant about maintaining his independence. The agreement they mentioned only applies to properties that were originally part of the development. They have zero authority over your land." I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun. "Mr. Peterson, would you be available on Friday for a meeting with the HOA representatives?" I wouldn't miss it for the world. By Friday morning, I was prepared. I'd gone through every document, had the property lines professionally verified, and even consulted with a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. When Gerald and Howard arrived, this time with a woman introduced as Patricia from the Architectural Committee, they found not just me, but Mr. Peterson sitting calmly at a table set up on the porch, documents neatly arranged. "Before we begin," I said pleasantly, "I'd like to clarify some property matters." Gerald waved his hand dismissively. "We're here for your decision about membership, not to debate property lines that were established decades ago." Mr. Peterson smiled. "Actually, those property lines are precisely what we need to discuss." For the next 20 minutes, we walked them through the documentation. The color drained from Gerald's face as he realized the implications. Patricia kept shaking her head, as if denial could change the survey results. Howard stared blankly at the lake, perhaps seeing his precious community dock in a new light. "This is irregular," Gerald finally stammered. "Our association has maintained that dock for 15 years. Without permission," I pointed out, "on private property." Frank never objected, Howard protested weakly. Mr. Peterson adjusted his glasses. Mr. Miller's decision not to press the issue during his lifetime was a courtesy, not a legal concession. "The dock remains unauthorized, as do the 3 boat slips currently attached to it, and the small beach area your members have been using." Patricia found her voice. "What exactly are you saying?" I leaned forward. "I'm saying that not only can you not force me to join your HOA or vacate my property, but you're the ones who've been encroaching all these years. According to state law, I could demand the immediate removal of all structures on my land." The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd heard in years. Gerald recovered first, his face flushing. "We could challenge these surveys." "You could," Mr. Peterson agreed amiably. "But the legal costs would be substantial, and based on these historical records, you would almost certainly lose. In addition, there would be the matter of 15 years of trespass damages." "What do you want?" Patricia asked bluntly, cutting through Gerald's blustering. I hadn't expected such a direct approach, but I was ready. "I want to be left alone to enjoy my uncle's cabin as he intended. No HOA membership, no aesthetic requirements, and no threats. Gerald sputtered. And the dock? The beach access? I'm not unreasonable. I'll grant an easement for the existing dock with 2 conditions. First, I get my own private boat slip maintained at HOA expense. Second, the HOA acknowledges in writing that my property is permanently exempt from your jurisdiction. That's outrageous! Gerald exploded. Patricia placed a calming hand on his arm. It's considerably less outrageous than being forced to dismantle a dock that services 28 properties. She turned to me. Would you be amenable to an annual recognition fee for the easement? Mr. Peterson interjected before I could answer. My client would accept a token payment of $1 annually with the understanding that this agreement will be properly recorded with the county to prevent any future misunderstandings. Howard, who'd been furiously typing on his tablet, looked up. The board will need to vote, but speaking unofficially, this seems like our best option. Gerald looked like he'd swallowed something sour, but nodded stiffly. The 3 weeks following our confrontation with the HOA board were tense but productive. I stayed at the cabin full-time, partly to protect my claim and partly because I'd discovered a growing attachment to the place. Each morning, I'd watch HOA members cautiously using their dock, which was technically on my property, while casting uncertain glances toward the cabin. Word had spread quickly through the community, creating ripples of speculation and concern. Among homeowners who'd grown accustomed to the board's unchallenged authority, Mr. Peterson called daily with updates on the negotiation process. Gerald had initially attempted to rally support for a legal challenge, but the projected costs quickly dampened the board's enthusiasm. Patricia proved to be the voice of reason, pointing out that even if they somehow won a protracted legal battle, the negative publicity would devastate property values throughout the community. Howard, ever the numbers man, had calculated that replacing the dock entirely on HOA-owned shoreline would cost upwards of $175,000, not including the logistical nightmare of reconfiguring boat slips and dealing with permits. By the 3rd week, reality had firmly set in. The HOA board scheduled an emergency community meeting at their clubhouse to vote on our proposed agreement. I wasn't officially invited, but Marge Donovan, a 70-something widow who lived 3 doors down from the community entrance, slipped me the details. "Been waiting 20 years to see Gerald taken down a peg," she whispered conspiratorially when she stopped by with a blueberry pie. "Never missed a meeting in 15 years, and I'm not missing this one." The clubhouse was packed that evening. I slipped in quietly and took a seat in the back row, nodding to a few curious faces that turned my way. Gerald looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 weeks. His shoulders slumped as he called the meeting to order. Patricia stood beside him, composed but tight-lipped, while Howard nervously shuffled through documents at a side table. "As you've all likely heard," Gerald began, his voice lacking its usual authoritative boom, "we've encountered a situation regarding the community dock and certain property boundaries." He proceeded to explain the predicament in carefully sanitized terms, never once acknowledging their initial attempt to bully me off my property. When he finished, the room erupted in questions and exclamations. "You mean we've been trespassing for 15 years?" asked a man in a fishing hat. "Not trespassing, Richard," Gerald replied stiffly. "There was a mutual understanding with the previous owner." "That's not what I heard," called out another voice. "Frank told me years ago that you tried to force him out, too." Patricia stepped forward before Gerald could respond. "What matters now is finding a solution that works for everyone. We've negotiated an easement agreement that will allow us to maintain our dock and beach access while respecting the legal property boundaries." The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours. Some residents were furious with the board for not doing proper due diligence 15 years ago. Others worried about setting a precedent for outside influence in their community. A vocal minority suggested abandoning the current dock entirely and building a new one on undisputed HOA property. until Howard grimly outlined the financial implications, which would require a special assessment of nearly $6,000 per household. Through it all, I remained silent, an observer to the community drama unfolding before me. Finally, when the debate had exhausted itself, Patricia called for a vote on the easement agreement. The measure passed by a substantial margin, with only Gerald and his most loyal supporters voting against it. The next morning, 2 notaries arrived at my cabin along with Patricia, Howard, and a visibly uncomfortable Gerald. We gathered around the same porch table where our confrontation had begun. One by one, documents were signed, stamped, and witnessed, the easement granting the HOA perpetual use of the dock area in exchange for $1 symbolic annually, the acknowledgement of my property's permanent exemption from HOA jurisdiction, and a separate agreement detailing the installation and maintenance of my private boat slip. Patricia was the only one who met my eyes as we completed the paperwork. "For what it's worth," she said quietly while Gerald was occupied with the notary, "this is probably for the best. The board had become inflexible over the years. Sometimes you need a wake-up call." By early May, construction crews arrived to install my boat slip, a premium double-width berth at the end of the dock with the best access to open water and a custom built-in storage locker. The HOA hadn't skimped on the installation, perhaps hoping quality workmanship might ease lingering tensions. I made a point of thanking Howard, who'd overseen the project with surprising attention to detail. "Just doing what the agreement stipulates," he said awkwardly, but I could tell he was pleased by the acknowledgement. Memorial Day weekend arrived with perfect weather, drawing nearly every homeowner to the lake. I launched my newly purchased used pontoon boat, nothing fancy, but perfect for lazy afternoons on the water, and carefully navigated to my slip for the first time. As I secured the boat, I noticed Gerald on the opposite end of the dock, pointedly, looking anywhere but in my direction as he loaded coolers onto his gleaming mastercraft. Some wounds would take longer to heal than others. Not everyone shared Gerald's animosity, though. Once the dust settled and the legal battle faded from immediate memory, several HOA members actually became quite friendly. Marge Donovan became a regular visitor, often arriving with baked goods and community gossip. The Hendersons, a retired couple with the lake house closest to mine, invited me to their annual 4th of July barbecue. Even Howard would occasionally stop by with questions about my solar panel installation, which he found intriguing from an energy efficiency standpoint. I learned that Uncle Frank hadn't been the only one who found the HOA leadership overbearing. For years, Gerald and his inner circle had ruled with meticulous adherence to rules they themselves had written, imposing fines for infractions as minor as unapproved mailbox designs or grass that exceeded 3 inches in height. My successful stand against their authority had created a small but significant shift in the community dynamic. At the August board meeting, as reported by my now reliable source, Marge, 3 homeowners successfully challenged architectural committee decisions, citing precedents that previously would have been dismissed without discussion. As summer transitioned to fall, I found myself spending more and more time at the cabin. What had begun as weekend getaways stretched into 3-day stays, then 4-day work weeks with remote work arrangements. My city apartment, once the center of my life, began to feel sterile and confining by comparison. By October, I had made my decision. I gave notice on my apartment lease, hired a moving company, and permanently relocated to what I now simply called home. The cabin needed work to be comfortable year-round, better insulation, an updated heating system, reliable internet for remote work, but each improvement felt less like a renovation and more like a conversation with Uncle Frank. I found his old tools in the shed, still arranged with naval precision, and used them whenever possible. When I uncovered his hand-drawn plans for a greenhouse addition he'd never built, I knew that would be my spring project. I made a point of honoring the property's rustic character even as I modernized its systems. The exterior remained natural cedar, weathering to a beautiful silver gray that no HOA-approved vinyl siding could match. I installed solar panels on the south-facing roof slope, a modern touch that Uncle Frank would have appreciated for its self-sufficiency, if not its aesthetics. A rain collection system followed, along with a small wind turbine that generated just enough power to run essential systems during outages. None of these improvements would have passed HOA standards, a fact I occasionally contemplated with quiet satisfaction while watching Gerald's tightly controlled community across the cove. Their uniform houses with matching roof lines and approved exterior color schemes had a certain pristine quality, but lacked the character and individuality of my evolving homestead. Winter brought a different rhythm to lake life. Most HOA members closed up their vacation homes by Thanksgiving, returning to primary residences in the city or flying south to Florida condominiums. I discovered the peaceful solitude of snow-blanketed mornings when the lake steamed with mist, and the only sounds were distant woodpeckers and the occasional crack of ice shifting. I spent evenings by the fireplace, going through Uncle Frank's journals and photographs, piecing together the life of a man I'd known but never fully understood. One entry from 15 years prior caught my attention. Association representatives. Came again today. Same offer, same threats. They don't understand that some things aren't for sale, and freedom is one of them. Let them build their dock where they want. Time will sort out the boundaries. I smiled at his prescience. Uncle Frank had known exactly what he was doing when he left me this property. He'd recognized something in me, perhaps a streak of his own stubborn independence, that would ensure his legacy remained intact. The property wasn't just land and a structure. It was a philosophy about living on your own terms. By spring, I had firmly established my place in the lake's ecosystem, both natural and social. I negotiated fishing rights with local conservation authorities, planted a native species garden that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds, and even reached a détente of sorts with most HOA members returning for the new season. My greenhouse broke ground in April, using reclaimed windows from a decommissioned school building and lumber milled from trees felled by winter storms. Gerald filed a complaint with the county about unsightly structures visible from the water, but the building inspector, who happened to be Marge Donovan's nephew, found everything perfectly up to code. A year after the confrontation that had changed everything, I celebrated with a small lakeside gathering. Marge came along with the Hendersons and a handful of other neighbors who'd chosen friendship over association politics. Even Howard attended briefly, though he claimed it was just to discuss the dock's annual maintenance inspection. As we watched the sunset from the shore, glasses raised to Uncle Frank's memory, I reflected on how differently things might have turned out. If I hadn't checked those property records, if I'd just given in to their demands or sold the place to avoid conflict, I'd have lost not just a piece of property, but a connection to my past and what had become my sanctuary for the future. Sometimes standing your ground isn't about being stubborn, it's about recognizing what's truly valuable and worth defending. Uncle Frank rarely spoke openly about his legal affairs or his conflicts with the HOA, but now I understand he was playing a long game. His last gift wasn't just the property itself, but the opportunity to learn his final lesson. Always know where your boundaries lie and never be afraid to defend them. As for the HOA, they've become remarkably respectful of property lines these days. Every January, Patricia herself delivers the symbolic dollar for the easement, along with detailed maintenance reports for the dock and my boat slip. Gerald eventually stepped down as board president, citing health concerns, though rumor has it the board quietly asked for his resignation after an independent audit revealed several financial irregularities in the association's books. Sometimes, on quiet mornings when mist rises from the lake just as it did during those childhood fishing lessons, I imagine Uncle Frank watching with approval as I carry on his legacy of principled independence. His cabin, my home, stands as a reminder that sometimes the most valuable inheritances aren't things, but the courage to protect what matters most.